Morning, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce, the Ukraine War news update for the 21st of July 2023. As recently, this will be a two-part video because something I show will be flagged by YouTube and it'll be restricted. So that's to try and get around that issue. Now let's go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, the usual caveats apply, of course. But I do think these are somewhat accurate, as I keep laboring to tell you. Now, liquidated personnel has jumped up maybe about 150 from where we have seen it over the last week or so. I think that might represent the Krasnohorivka attack that the Russians carried out a couple of days ago. That resulted in a bit of a disaster for them in terms of loss of troops and the loss of armored vehicles, as well as the loss of one of their Telegram champions, I guess. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second, the use of cluster munitions. But yeah, 680, I think, represents that. 4 tanks at 15 APV. So they did lose a lot of armored personnel vehicles in that attack. They lost a number of tanks as well. I don't know if the stats for Krasnohorivka have been sort of spread across a couple of days or whether they're all sort of lumped in today or not. I don't know. But it's trying to piece this jigsaw together, isn't it? 18 artillery systems is a big loss for the Russians again. Not the biggest. We've seen over 40 on certain days, but 18 is still significant. And there will be at some point, I think, the situation where the Russians are unable to defend adequately using their artillery. And that is when the Ukrainians can properly negotiate the minefields without fear of being hammered from above. And that will aid their counter-offensive maneuvers for sure. 7 anti-aircraft warfare system is a massive number. As you can see from the total, the average is less than 1 a day. We're at day 510-ish. So 440 over the course of the war means less than 1 a day. 7 is a huge number. And obviously, it'd be interesting to know exactly what pieces of equipment were lost, whether they are high-value pieces of kit. You would assume with 7 being lost, at least something in there is going to be of a high value, and arguably they all are to some degree. Drones 15 and 5 cruise missiles being lost. That's not from last night. That will be from the night before. Ukraine is being consistently hammered. Odessa is being consistently targeted by the Russians with their cruise missiles. In fact, as we speak right now, there are air alerts for Onyx anti-ship cruise missiles being sent against Odessa. So that is, this is now Friday morning UK time, and probably late morning Ukrainian time, midday Ukrainian time. So they are just doing that at different times of the day and totally trying to totally cripple the Ukrainian ability to export grain. And again, we'll return to that. 11 vehicles and fuel tanks here and 1 piece of special equipment. Let's just dip into a few bits and pieces here. Actually, I'll go to special equipment first. Here is an excavator laying some dragon's teeth. You also see them sort of digging trenches. That has had a grenade dropped on it by a drone. So that could well be the 1 piece of special equipment. We often see various numbers throughout the week in terms of special equipment. I usually say it's going to be ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, or electronic warfare, but sometimes it is things like excavators. And it's important to take them out as well, because that is creating the defensive capabilities for the Russians that the Ukrainian forces will have to negotiate. Okay, this is John Kirby saying US supplied cluster munitions are in Ukrainian hands and are being employed against the Russians. Quote, we have gotten some initial feedback from Ukrainians and they're using them quite effectively. So they are using them, and the claim is that they're quite effective. Feedback is pretty good for them. Ostensibly, they need shells, right? Whether they're cluster or not, they just need shells, and these will be helping for sure. I would just voice a note of concern in how these how certain events are being portrayed. And I'm going to give you 2 sources that I use regularly and I'm going to kind of call them out a little bit here. So War Monitor says Ukrainian forces using recently supplied cluster ammunition by the US hit and destroyed a very large group of infantry of Russian forces south of Krasnohorivka in a night strike. Now, if I read that and I didn't know any better, I would think, goodness me, 25, 30, 40 troops being taken out there, a very large group of infantry have been destroyed. That's amazing. And then you watch reporting from Ukraine. Again, a source I dip into every day. I watch every one of their videos in the morning just to get an idea of what's going on. And their thumbnail is best use of cluster shells. They just evaporated. Cluster munitions wipe out Russian reinforcements. And the actual footage is this, and I can't show you the whole footage, but what you have is, oops, I just right. What you have is 12 people here, right? 12 people, and then a regular conventional shell lands in the middle of them, so it's not cluster munition, and it's a bunch of people fall over, and 4 of them stay down, and the rest of them sort of run away. Of those 4, are all 4 dead? Don't know. I think maybe a 5th one is sort of moving around. Not sure. And then it cuts to later on. You get this part, which is that's the cluster munition bit, and there are 2 strikes with cluster munitions after people have run away, and we don't know the effect of those cluster munitions. So in the footage, we can see Ukrainian cluster strikes hitting Russian infantry. Well, actually, not really. So what you see are 2 conventional strikes and then cluster munitions. Now, with a conventional strike, at most 4, possibly 3 are killed there and then, and no more. So, and then we have absolutely no confirmation that more are killed with the cluster munitions, at least as far as the information I have, right, and the footage available. So when you're reporting that a very large group of infantry forces were destroyed, hit and destroyed, that is not true. And when you have they just evaporated, cluster munitions wipe out Russian reinforcements, we need to be careful. And that video may entail more than just that strike, right? So, but we just need to be careful about getting sucked in by, I don't want to say clickbait, but by claims that possibly distort reality a bit more and a bit too positive. Right, the situation was this was an effective strike, and this actually led to the death of war propagandist Mikhail Luchin. So he's one of those who definitely did die in that. That's Misha in Donbass, but it's not really as is being claimed by some sources. It was a good strike, and it was effective, and it wiped out some troops, and we don't know the injuries. So it could have been, out of those 12 people, maybe 10 of them were taken out, so that they were, injured or dead. But again, is that a very large group of troops destroyed? No, I would argue not. Ukrainian artillery, and this is War Monitor again saying Ukrainian artillery hit and destroyed in counter battery fired 2 MLRS firing positions of Russian forces as a result of the strike. 2 BM-21 Grads were destroyed. So I'm highlighting this because of the importance of counter battery. Taking out 2 Grads is significant, although no Grads are mentioned on this. That could be from the day before, or it could be to be added to tomorrow's. So anyway, just highlighting how important counter battery fire is. And it works on Grads, it seems, as well. So this is tracking the trajectory of the munitions as they're fired out of the piece of kit, whether it be towed howitzer, SPG, or an MLRS. You track it with some kind of radar, and you work out exactly where that came from, and then you get hold of your own artillery, and then you hit those coordinates. And if you can do that really quickly, that piece of kit hasn't moved. and it gets destroyed. And here we have an example of two getting taken out by counter battery fire. The argument from the Russians is, at the moment, from what we hear from intercepted calls and people like Popov, the general who's been dismissed, we hear that Russian counter battery fire is just not effective at all. It's non-existent, at least in many places. So Ukraine says it's captured a Kadyrovite commander, so it's a Chechen commander, National Guard Colonel Mykola Urshilovich, says it happened on Tuesday. They don't name the new POW, but say he's from Shali in Chechnya and company commander of the 70th Guards Motorized Rifle Regiment. So that will be useful for them. And we go on to some Russia on fire. I haven't actually shown much Russia on fire recently. This is an important one. An electrical substation is on fire in Sochi in Russia. It's reported that the A149 highway towards Krasnaya Polyana is limited at this moment. The cause of the fire is being investigated. Other people are saying how important this is. The Russian railway network depends an awful lot on these kind of substations supplying the railway, and yeah, that's an important target. Or it depends whether it's just arson, whether it's partisans, whether it's targeted by Ukrainians, so on and so forth. St. Petersburg, a fire on the roof of a residential building. That looks pretty substantial. Doesn't look too good. And this is in Moscow. Fairly similar state of affairs there. So again, this is probably just a random fire in a residential block, but we've suddenly seen a spate of fires over the last few days, getting back to what we have previously seen. Right, let's move on to strikes. And Odessa has been targeted yet again last night, and as I say, is being targeted right now too. Quite a night in Ukraine, but still more attacks on Odessa, says Tim White. 2 people were injured when Russia attacked an agricultural enterprise in the region. Caliber cruise missiles hit grain warehouses and agricultural machinery. War crime. Putin continues weaponizing food. It's the same one. It's not supposed to be. Overnight, a Caliber cruise missile hit an agricultural enterprise in the Odessa region. As a result of the attack, 100 tons of peas and 20 tons of barley were destroyed. And of course, all of this stuff is due to go out to other places, right? Other nations, not for Ukraine. So this is hitting the food supply to the whole world. And then, as I explained yesterday, Russia then say, "Hey, we can supply the grain instead." So it's almost, yeah, it's almost a corporate crime. Right, Russian Voenko here, so a Russian mill blogger saying Russia wants to create a Holodomor. So this is the forced famine, Stalin famine that caused the death of so many people, particularly in Ukraine. It's now being called a genocide. Many countries around the world are now going along with that and declaring that, yes, it was a genocide. It was kind of purposeful. Here we have that narrative about this being repeated with the attacks on Odessa. In other words, that this is good. It's great that people are going to starve, and we should be doing more of it. So this is a 13th, so a famous kind of Russian voice, considering how actively warehouses with grain crops are burning in the ports of Odessa, as well as in other port cities under the blows of our missiles. It can be understood that soon a Holodomor will come to Ukraine. The main thing is not to stop. If only the bridges would be dropped so that there would be no delivery and good evening. In other words, yeah, this is incitement to genocide. Literally incitement to genocide. Attention, the Russians again have launched supersonic anti-ship missiles Onyx in the direction of the Odessa region. Stay in the shelter, Ukrainian Air Force has announced just now. Meanwhile, a moment of morning explosion of a drone in the temporarily occupied Crimea. It's quite a significant blow, actually, this explosion. So it looks like these drones, I mean, there's such a variety of drones that the Ukrainians are using, but that is a fairly sizable explosion going on there in Crimea. Don't know what it's hit, but Crimea it seems to be consistently targeted by the Ukrainians. Here we have a claim yesterday about Kursk region and an explosion there. That's in Russia. Then I don't know if this is the same footage. It looks like there's a couple of wires going across there, but this has just come out now. Kursk region explosion, and this is the same. This is the same source. I don't know. I mean, there's tree. There's no. It's maybe actually it's not. There just are lines going across in a number of places. I don't know. I can't see that building. It may be the same strike, but Kursk hit possibly twice. UAVs, so drones are roaming over Moscow again. So this was yesterday, presumably not Russian drones, but you can't tell. Yeah, it's that's a concern for the Russians for sure. Right, let's go to other bits and pieces. Not too much in this section today. Journalist Dmytro Kilyuk was abducted by Russians in his garden of his home in Kyiv 2 weeks after the Russian full-scale invasion. After months of research, RSF tracked him down. While Russia denies holding him hostage in the Moscow prison, RSF obtained evidence. 300 Ukrainian soldiers and civilians might be held in this Moscow prison. Cases of dog bites, electrocutions, and food deprivation leading to loss of consciousness among the prisoners is reported. Ukrainian detainees are forced to read propaganda books singing Russian patriotic songs. So this is another, like, again, it's who are the good guys here? It ain't Russia. So kidnapping civilians and, well, not just kidnapping them, arresting them and putting them in prison is not cool. And that's an understatement. So, yeah. Keep an eye on that one. I want to know. I mean, Ukraine, the latest, spend quite a lot of time talking about how this will be one of the almost hidden terrors of this war. The filtration camps and the movement of people. We've talked about sort of young people, children being kidnapped and exported out of their homeland, and no doubt brainwashed, and like how much of a terrible war crime that is. But actually, it expands to adults as well, being sent through filtration to possibly camps, places in the different extremes of the Russian Federation, maybe as far away from Ukraine as possible. But there's going to be some fallout from that for sure. And I guess only time will tell to the extent that that has taken place. Okay, that's the end of this first part of the news video this morning. Check out for part 2 to come out shortly.